Hello and welcome to everyone. I'm Mithali Jain, Legal Director at Avaz. We're a global campaigning organization with 65 million members around the world. We've been investigating and combating online disinformation for the last few years. Today, together with the Real Facebook Oversight Board, we will be hosting an event, which I'll be moderating, which focuses on the human cost of online disinformation and hate. We know that what happens on Facebook doesn't stay on Facebook, but who are the individuals most impacted by the scourge of disinformation and hate? How have algorithms affected real human lives? We have four amazing women joining us who call themselves survivors of Facebook trauma. Individually, their stories reveal tremendous loss, pain, and grief. And collectively, their stories demonstrate how Facebook threatens the very fabric of US democracy. And let's be clear, these women are representative of countless others who cannot join us today, not just in the US, but around the world, who have also been impacted by Facebook. 7 out of 10 Americans use Facebook, and over half use it as a source of news. A recent poll by Survey USA found that 65% of Americans have seen political misinformation on Facebook, and 1 in 4 have believed these falsehoods. This ecosystem of misinformation and hate, fueled by lies about COVID, election fraud, political candidates, and the glorification of violence and coups, has plunged America into deep chaos and confusion, leading to cleavages in the soul of our nation. Joining us in our lineup today are 4 women whom Avaz has been in conversation with: Christina Tsikas, Joyce Jones, Hannah Giddings, and Carmen Palmer. And joining these women is Eric Neng of Muslim Advocates, a national civil rights organization which fights to ensure that American Muslims and all Americans can live free from online discrimination and hate. So without further ado, let's turn to the survivors. First up, we're going to hear from Hannah and Carmen, who were both in Kenosha, Wisconsin in late August this year, when a peaceful protest against the police shooting of Jacob Blake was besieged by white supremacist groups. Hannah, can you tell us a little bit about how your life was changed by Facebook the night of August 25th this year?
Yeah, hi. I like to keep stressing the fact that that day felt so normal to me at the beginning of it. Just with my family, with my partner and my daughter, and I had no clue how much my life would change. And we went out there that night because Jacob Blake had been shot by a police officer right in our city, near where we lived. And we knew him. We knew him personally. And not that it should take that to be upset about it, but it was like extra hurtful for us. So of course we made plans to go out and join the protest that night. And little did we know that there was also another group being facilitated by Facebook that was basically a civilian militia, right-wing extremists who felt that it was their duty to assist the police, basically the National Guard, all of the over-the-top military forces that they had there, and they were allowed to organize like that through Facebook.
And can you tell us about what happened when you went down to the protest?
Yeah, it was like nothing I've ever seen in my entire life before. I've lived here my whole life, and it was like something out of a war movie. This is a big city, but it's not that big, and there were a lot of people, probably more people I've ever seen gathered in Kenosha, but the excessive force from the military was what was so overwhelming there. And for people who weren't burning down buildings, who weren't destroying public property, anything like that. So it was pretty shocking to me to see that level be matched like that.
Can you describe for us exactly what happened in terms of how your late partner, Anthony, came into contact with Kyle Rittenhouse?
Yeah, absolutely. We had been being pushed south down Sheridan Road for a while, and we were very close to our house where we were walking, and I was about to say to him, like, let's just go home when we get up to where we live. And before I could even get those words out of my mouth, we hear gunshots a couple blocks up ahead of us. And for a minute, we were just kind of looking around, waiting to see what would happen. Then people started running like crazy, like in the opposite direction. And then we see Kyle Rittenhouse running down the street, maybe 15, 20 feet away from us. And everybody is shouting that he had just shot somebody, he killed somebody. They were yelling for someone to grab him. And Anthony was just that type of person. He was not going to let an armed active shooter hurt anybody else. And he ran off after him and tried to take this kid down, this kid who was running around waving a semi-automatic assault rifle. And he had nothing on him. We weren't armed. We were not armed. We had our skateboards with us. And he still ran and tried to take him down and ended up getting murdered in the process.
Hannah, what is the connection of what happened between what happened that night in Kenosha and Facebook?
I think there are definitely a lot of connections to be made there. For one, I think it's an interesting point that, Anthony and I both used our Facebook accounts pretty actively, and we were following a lot of the things in the political climate out here, especially with what had happened to Jake Blake, and neither of us saw any inkling of the Kenosha Guard event page. Or maybe if I had, I can't even remember specifically seeing it in the days coming before that Tuesday. So I think that's a really interesting point. How is Facebook targeting certain things? And the sheer number of times that the Kenosha Guard event page had been flagged, which is 455 times, by the way, just dwarfed the next highest event that had been reported, which was 18 times. So the Kenosha Guard page flagged 450 times. Next highest one 18 times. And still, the page was left up. It not only left up, it was deemed not threatening, not a danger. When they're clearly people blatantly inciting violence, saying they're gonna shoot Black people, saying they're gonna shoot to kill rioters, looters, protecting the city. It's a shock. It's a complete shock that was somehow left up.
Now, as you know, Hannah, Mark Zuckerberg later called what happened in Kenosha, quote, an operational mistake. How do you respond to that?
I mean, how would anybody feel to hear somebody call the death of their life partner like an operational error like that? There's really no words for it. I mean, how another human being can have so little empathy like that is beyond me.
And can you describe a little more the emotional toll this has taken on you and your daughter?
I wish I could even like put into words the kind of pain that is never going to leave me. I'm never going to forget this, or how this made me feel, or having to explain to my 3-year-old daughter that he's gone, that we can't go back home, and he's gone and he's not coming back. Why? I mean, people die every day as a part of life, but still in this way where it could have been so easily preventable, where it was literally only caused because of hate and ignorance. Like I said, there really are just no words. Every day, this is here with me every single day.
What is your brief message to Facebook executives?
It's really hard. I've been thinking about this, and it's really hard to like nail it down to any one thing. The only thing that I can ask and beg and plead for is for the people who have these higher up jobs with Facebook, even Mark Zuckerberg himself. I know it's seems like we're two different people. I'm just like a regular person who doesn't have billions of dollars, and he's obviously the CEO of Facebook, but find some common ground to make a change, to do something different, because this is not the first time that this has happened. And it's not going to be the last time if things keep going the way they have been.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah, for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Carmen, is Carmen? Carmen, you were also there that night in Kenosha. Are you here? Okay, let's move on. Hannah spoke to the consequences of an event page that was not monitored, but the problem is much broader than Kenosha. And indeed, the problem is broader than the night that this happened in Kenosha. In fact, Avaz, in the weeks following the Kenosha shooting, found 50 pages and 27 public groups that shared content glorifying violence or praising Kyle Rittenhouse, as well as false and misleading content. And by September, those pages had over 19 million followers, and the groups over 2 million followers. And thus far, to our knowledge, Facebook has only removed about 11 of those pages and groups and less than half of the content that Avaz flagged. I now want to turn to Eric Nang of Muslim Advocates, who can speak about Kenosha in a broader context of the work that Muslim Advocates has been looking at. Eric?
Thank you so much. Yes, my name is Eric Nang, and I am the Media Relations Officer at Muslim Advocates, a national civil rights organization that works to stop bigotry in its tracks. Facebook's role in spreading hate and disinformation is something that we sadly know a lot about. What you've just heard is consistent with what we've seen from Facebook at Muslim Advocates. In fact, Muslim Advocates has been sounding the alarm about Facebook's event pages problem for half a decade. In 2015, a notorious anti-Muslim bigot and militia supporter named John Ritzheimer used a Facebook event page to organize a hate rally targeting a mosque in Phoenix, Arizona. This event page encouraged the 600 people who RSVP'd to, quote, utilize Second Amendment right at this event, unquote. American Muslims regularly face threats and hate crimes, particularly at their houses of worship. And here was a man associated with militias like the Oath Keepers and the One Percenters telling 600 people to go harass and target this specific mosque and bring their guns. Of course, Muslim Advocates went straight to Facebook to warn them about this. But this would be the first of many times over the years where we would warn Facebook about something harmful on their platform, only to be given excuses, stalling tactics, and non-answers. Over and over and over, we at Muslim Advocates have specifically warned Facebook about militias and white nationalists using their event pages to organize hate, and yet they have done nothing. You just heard from a real person who has been forever scarred by Facebook. What happened in Kenosha was not an operational mistake. It was willful negligence. As Hannah said earlier, the Kenosha Guard's Facebook event page, which featured a call to arms, was flagged to the company at least 455 times. Despite this, Facebook, as usual, failed to heed these warnings and failed to take the event page down. Muslim Advocates has warned Facebook about militias and hate groups of using their event page at least 10 times over the past 5 years. It is simply inexcusable that after all those warnings, Facebook failed to take action in Kenosha. Before any more people are threatened by armed bigots and any more lives are lost, Facebook must finally take responsibility for the horror it continues to enable and stop militias and hate groups from using platforms to organize hate. But of course, Facebook's legacy of hate and violence isn't just limited to the United States. It's a global problem. Just last month, Muslim Advocates and the Global Project on Hate and Extremism released a report called Complicit, the human cost of Facebook's disregard for human life, or for Muslim life. This comprehensive report documents how Facebook has enabled hate, threats, and even genocide against Muslims in countries around the world. In India, for example, Facebook and WhatsApp have been used to foment mob violence against Muslims. In Myanmar, Facebook allowed violence-inciting rhetoric to thrive on the platform that even the United Nations said helped enable an actual genocide against Rohingya Muslims in the country. In fact, soon you'll hear from actual Burmese victims of Facebook-enabled violence. In country after country, our report shows a pattern of Facebook failing to enforce its rules and allowing anti-Muslim hate to run rampant. You can read this report at muslimadvocates.org/complicit. So just to wrap things up, it's clear that Facebook has become a leading engine of hate and violence against Muslims and other vulnerable communities all around the world. Lives are at stake. And I hope you all pay close attention to the stories that you hear today. When we're talking about Facebook, we're not just talking about tech industry intrigue or politics. We're talking about real people, real human lives that Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg have harmed and that they have not done enough to protect. And it's not just because of a technical glitch or a disagreement over free speech. Facebook has been warned by these problems many, many times by Muslim advocates and others, and they're choosing to do nothing. So now I'll kick things back to Mitali. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. As Eric pointed out, this harm has not been limited to the US, nor has it been limited to 2020 in the leading up to the US elections. It is global and particularly disproportionately impacts vulnerable communities in the global South. Next, we're going to hear from two survivors by video with whom we've been in conversation. They're both Rohingya and from the country of Myanmar. Their names are Tun Kin and Muhammad Shafiq. So can we please see the video?
I see Facebook or company. Kishi hatawattara hula mokwaide tegile. I hatakan hoitama. Je hatakan neki indela Facebook tu ase bolna donsa je jagagono maje bash manche hamachara dubde. Yana ma Facebook tu bolna donsa. Assalamu alaikum. Ana Muhammad Shafiq. I Bangladesh. Kutwalang Rohingya refugee camp first number camp taki.
Before 2011, Facebook didn't exist in Myanmar, but now it has around 18 million users. The government uses the social media platform as a way of spreading information to the public. So do anti-Muslim hate groups.
Some Buddhist extremists were spreading anti-Rohingya campaign and hate speech against Rohingya, including some extreme monks spreading that these are illegal, we must drive them out, they are not belongs to this country, we need to get rid of them and kill them all, and government allowing it through Facebook.
Facebook ko di bagwa darbar dakkan sis decision to afradi hatakal indela azanu to arazanuri ubeshish lage de indela haram nagaro saadi indela harafe kutte ekar moka boni Facebook ko zuriya.
Facebook were warned that hardliners were using the platform to spread lies and inflame anti-Rohingya sentiment, but they did little to stop it. And in 2017, this resulted in the rape and massacre of tens of thousands of Rohingya people. Their homes were burned, and over 700,000 had to flee the country.
UN investigators have blamed Facebook for playing a role in the genocide.
I'm afraid that Facebook has now turned into a beast.
Until today, there are about 140,000 IDPs. Their houses been burned down, and many the government security forces, burned Rohingya houses and killed and slaughtered many Rohingyas. This is as a result of hate speech against Rohingya. This is as a result of how Facebook allowing them to use this hate speech.
Zuckerberg admitted Facebook had been used to foment division and incite offline violence in Myanmar, and promised to do better. But has anything really changed? Observers say that many of Facebook's new policies are not being implemented and fear further violence against Rohingya and other minorities. the International Court of Justice asked Facebook to provide evidence to help them prosecute those responsible for the Rohingya genocide. But Facebook declined.
Many Rohingya lost their lives because of hate speech by Facebook, and I don't believe that Facebook is doing enough.
I Facebook में मुझे डोले नाफरती खबर अकाल होना ज़रिया सोई गान मिसो जागोई ला आरे जनरे तुक देते आरे जनर तू तो आसानो जागोई.
And although Facebook says that hate speech is at a historic low in Myanmar, civil society researchers continue to find dozens of networks of accounts, pages, and groups continuing to spread hate and lies against Rohingyas and other minorities. Let's change course a little. Another kind of violence that Facebook has wreaked on far too many lives this year has been as a result of COVID-related misinformation. In fact, the BBC has estimated hundreds to have died around the world directly due to having believed COVID misinformation. Our next survivor, Christina Tsikas, will speak directly to this. She lost her father earlier this year to COVID. Kristen, can you please tell us about the role that you believe misinformation played in your father's life?
Sure. Thank you so much, Mitali, for having me here, and everyone else at Avaz and all the other spokespeople today. My name is Christina Tsikas. I'm the co-founder of a group called Marked by COVID, which I launched in the days following my father's death from COVID-19 on June 30th. My dad was a supporter of President Trump and his Republican enablers. When the states started to reopen here in the United States, and that messaging that it was safe to be on the other side of the pandemic, that if you didn't have an underlying health condition, really was the thing that my dad hung to in making his decisions in early June that ultimately led to him waking up with COVID symptoms and passing away 19 days later. We now know that over 30% of COVID misinformation comes from one person and one person alone, and that's Donald Trump. I've been very vocal about the responsibility of elected officials to do their job, to uphold public health values. But the other place that I have also felt very passionately about is about the enablers around Donald Trump as well. And unfortunately, Facebook is one of those. Facebook may not have pulled the trigger, but Facebook did drive away the runaway car. And this is what I mean by this. In the days following my dad's death, in setting up his legacy account, I was appalled to see his newsfeed littered with misinformation, ranging from the questioning the efficacy of mask wearing to poking fun of folks wearing masks and practicing social distancing. And that shed a lot of light on the conversations that my dad and I had started to have earlier that month, where up until that time, my dad was a believer that this was a threat. He listened to me. But as the states started to reopen and the main message was sent from the president, reiterated on cable news, and then blasted all over his news feed that we were in a different public health state of mind, I lost my battle in being able to help keep my dad safe. Something that I like to point out is that my dad was a very normal guy. I have been very privileged to be able to go to a very elite college, go to graduate school at a very elite graduate school. I have access to a lot of information, and I could not keep my father safe. If I can't keep my father safe, then who can? This is an important issue, and it really, to me, underlines the pernicious influence of Facebook on our public health. And my message for Facebook executives and Mark Zuckerberg is that it's time to get to the root of the issue, look at the bias that is inherent in the algorithm, and make real changes, especially when it comes to the issues that there is hard truth around, like COVID and the way to keep one another safe. So thank you, Mitali, for allowing me to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you for sharing. And in fact, supporting what Kristen just said, Avaaz in its own investigation, in a sample of over 100 viral COVID misinformation posts that it investigated, found that, and these are posts that had been fact-checked by independent fact checkers, that 41% of those on Facebook were not labeled. And even those that were labeled took such a delay to be labeled that by the time they were labeled, many users saw and many times believed the misinformation. And so let's turn again to finally hear from Joyce Jones, who ran for mayor of her small town of Montebello, Alabama, earlier this year. Joyce, welcome to the panel. How did misinformation on Facebook affect you personally?
Well, good morning, and thanks again to Mitali and this whole group, and I just want to thank you for the great work that you're doing to make our social media space a little bit safer for us as end users. I'm Joyce Jones. I ran for mayor in my small little town in Montebello, Alabama, less than 7,000 people approximately. And as mayoral elections go, they are supposed to be nonpartisan. And so that was my whole platform. I ran on a platform of unity and inclusion. As you can imagine, living in the South, there's not a lot of representation. There's not a wide range of representation in government in small towns. And I saw a need and I decided I wanted to run. And so I did that. But living in this age of COVID, you can't really campaign the way that we traditionally think about campaigning, because we were trying to be cautious and careful about exposing people to the virus that's out right now. And so our main source of information was Facebook. And we used Facebook as a platform as a tool to get our platform out to the citizens of our town. But what happened to me is what happens all across this country right now in this divisive political climate that we've created, that is fueled by Facebook, the algorithms that they use to promote negative information. We did a mayoral forum with me and my opponent on a Tuesday night. I woke up the next morning on Monday to find out that I had been supporting the act of defunding the police in our small little town. I wanted to defund the police and first responders, which was a surprise to me mostly because I never said anything like that. I only said that I wanted to add services to our local police. I wanted to help first responders do their jobs a little bit better. And actually, my family is very supportive of military, police, and we have people in all walks of my life who are connected to those kind of services. So it was really hurtful to me. And I tried for days to combat the information that was being put out about me, the disinformation. There was this concerted campaign that was being fueled by outside voices that were having an influence on our small, nonpartisan elections. And no matter how positive I tried to be, no matter how much I tried to fight it, it was impossible for me to combat it because the algorithm is built to give so much voice and so much credit to the negative information that's being spread. And there were fake accounts that were started and small groups, community groups within Facebook that just kept pushing these lies, this disinformation, and even personal attacks that resulted in just a very negative and it tore apart our city to the point where the day of the elections, my own grandmother, who was 88 and was going to, for the very first time, cast her vote for somebody in her family, right? She stood in line for over an hour. And because there were poll watchers who had started to believe all the negative things that had been said about me online through Facebook, caused a ruckus at the poll, because we only had one polling location in our city. Everybody in the city voted in one place for the mayoral elections. And my grandmother was actually turned away for wearing a T-shirt that had my name on it, which is not against the law in Alabama. You can wear political things to vote. You just can't influence other people. And so my mother and my grandmother were actually turned away that day. They had to go home and change. It was just a really horrendous day for my family. That was just the pinnacle of it. But what happens, I think what we need to understand and make Mark Zuckerberg and other executives understand is what happens on Facebook doesn't just stay on Facebook. It goes home with us. It goes to the grocery store with us. It goes to our jobs. Our children are affected. I'm the mom of 4 children, and my children were seeing things on Facebook about their own mom that they just were having a hard time, putting that someplace in their minds. And we have family all over this country. And what happened in Montevallo isn't a special case. It's happening all across our nation. It's happening all across our world. People are being affected because there's a platform that allows people this opportunity to spread hate. It allows them this opportunity to spread lies, and it goes unchecked. If there's something that they can do to help us be able to at least combat it, I think we at least need a chance to make things fair. If there are going to be lies spread, if there's going to be disinformation, a place for people to put that out, if we're going to say that, then at least make the other side of that have just as much validity. Give people a chance to fight the disinformation. Every day I was putting out posts, sometimes 2 and 3 times a day, but my information was getting just drummed out. It was hidden. People would have to search for the truth while their lies were being spread like wildfire. And so all we're asking is that at least give us a chance. If the platform is going to be here, make it so that everyone's voice has equal opportunity to be heard, and that the truth is given as much validity as the lies.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you also for reminding us that whilst everyone has been looking at the national election landscape, small town elections in small cities across this country are also under attack by misinformation campaigns and lies. And Facebook, to our knowledge, does not have fact checkers for local elections, and that is an oversight. Okay, well, without further ado, we have a number of journalists who've joined us, and I want to thank our survivors who've spoken, and turn now to our journalists to start asking questions. Okay.
Elizabeth from Reuters is the first question, Mitali.
Elizabeth from Reuters, go ahead and please put on your video and unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So my main question really is what the survivors and the campaigners involved in this event would like Facebook to do differently, and particularly sort of now in this post-election period, if you're seeing any of the same issues, that are close to you coming.
We can't hear you, Elizabeth. Can you speak closer to the phone?
Elizabeth, you're very faint. Okay, let's perhaps come back to Elizabeth. In the meantime, can we have Daniel from AFP join us? Please put your video on and unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, so I have actually 2 questions. The first one would be for Hannah and the second for Joyce. My question for Hannah would be to know whether Facebook did any form of outreach to you after the events in Kenosha, and if they did, what did they say? And if they did not, what would you have expected them to tell you? And I'll just jump to my next question to Joyce, and maybe let you answer after that. I was wondering what you were thinking of Facebook's efforts to, as they say, combat disinformation, misinformation on their platform during the 2020 presidential cycle. If you thought those efforts were satisfying, and where you would see the areas where they could improve.
Yeah, you want me to answer first? Okay, it's a really great question, and I am so sorry to tell you that the answer is no. I did not hear anything from Facebook. To my knowledge, I don't think any of the other two people who were shot that night did either, which is so just wrong to me. I mean, like I said, these are lives that have been completely ruined. Just completely shattered, I should say. And it's I don't know. I sent a message to Mark Zuckerberg myself, actually, over Facebook Messenger. I don't expect to hear back from him, but just trying to appeal to people's humanity, better nature, like just showing that we are just people who are being hurt by this system that is clearly imperfect. And another thing too, like post this happening, kind of what Joyce was saying about having your family and friends and everybody. I mean, this is a small town too. Everybody in this city knows who we are. And they're still allowed to just, like all those groups that Mitali was talking about, they're still allowed to be out here spreading misinformation, saying that Anthony deserved to be shot because he was a felon, and just jumping to conclusions about it, pulling up his old records when nobody really knows what the actual situation is, and just the fact that people are allowed to be out here saying that somebody deserved to get killed the way that my partner did in the streets that we lived in. It's honestly deplorable. So it's too bad, but maybe they'll come around and say something eventually. I'm not hopeful though.
And yeah, Daniel, you ask if I thought Facebook did a good enough job, I think, with helping combat misinformation with the national elections that we just experienced. I would have to say it seems a little too late to me. They've started trying to put up these notices that say, the caveat that says, this information, there might be more information out there to combat this. But that's been so recent, and it almost just seems like a, just a disclaimer. It's not, and it almost seems just an effort to protect themselves, not really to give people a chance to hear the truth. I think Facebook, these are some really smart people. They've been able to make this whole platform go global. It's being used to get information out so well. I think there's an opportunity for them to do this job a little bit better. Elections are important. The people we elect are important. Leadership matters. And if people don't get the correct information, if all they're fed is untruths and lies, then we will continue to keep having problems, because people are they're going to keep electing people who don't really have their self-interest at heart. So I'm really passionate about trying to make sure that people get access to the truth. It isn't just about telling people that the truth is out there. It's about making sure that they see it the same way that they see the negative information. So the short answer to your question is no, I don't think they are doing enough. I think there is more that can be done. Now, I don't know exactly how that's going to look, or, what the change needs to be, because I'm not the expert in that area. But I can tell you, as an end user, as a person who was affected by it personally, and by seeing what it does to our entire country, that I believe that something has to be done.
Thank you, Joyce. And just to put a finer point on what Joyce said, Avaaz continues its investigative research and has found in the post-election period an alarming amount of continuing disinformation about the elections. And in fact, a Stop the Steal set of groups that amassed over 300,000 followers in the days after the election. And of course, this week, Avaz helped to get the Steve Bannon network down, network of pages down. And so the efforts continue. And as we know, we're currently facing a democratic emergency in terms of really being able to push for a peaceful transition of power. And so all of this misinformation continues to matter. Okay, our next question is from Elizabeth, who has, I think she may be having technical issues. I'm going to ask the question on her behalf to our survivors. What do the survivors and campaigners involved in this panel want Facebook to do differently? And what should Facebook be doing, particularly now in this post-election period? Who'd like to take that question first?
I can jump in from Muslim Advocates. One of the core things is really Facebook needs to enforce its own rules. This isn't just, we're not asking them to necessarily do anything that's new or difficult or technically challenging. We're asking them to enforce the rules that they have on the books. We're asking them to take a common sense approach to stop hate and violence and disinformation, which they are not doing right now. And then specifically on the event pages issue, Muslim Advocates has been sounding the alarm on this for 5 years now, and we want them to ban the use of event pages for the purposes of harassment, organizing, and violence. We want them to make sure that white nationalist groups and militias are not allowed to use the event pages to weaponize them against vulnerable communities. This would have helped in Kenosha. This is a problem that is still ongoing, and Facebook refuses to do anything about it.
I'd like to add off of that too. That is, first of all, perfectly said the way that Eric said it. Why has this been going on for so long? Why have we been fighting for this for so long? And still people are dying because of this. Real people are being, I hate how Zuckerberg's also said something to the effect of what happened in Myanmar going offline violence or whatever he said. Online violence is a real thing too. It starts there. The tolerance of intolerance, this is how it's going to end. It's always going to end in violence like this. When you're allowing these things to breed and start with conversations between people, that's where it needs to be cut off at first before it gets this far.
And if I can just jump in quickly, I think one of the other things that Facebook can do to help us is make customer service a real thing for Facebook. Like, there's no way, if in the case, of my election, when the fake accounts were started, you can report that, but they just go to what people call Facebook jail, right? And then they're right back with another fake account. And but there's no one that you can talk to. There's no one that you can reach out to. There's no way for you to get information or access or help on how to fight that on the platform, on Facebook. You have to figure it out yourself. And if you're gonna have a product out here like Facebook, at least make it accessible so that people have access to the people who are running it, so that you will know what you need to do.
It's literally Facebook. They literally use instant messenger. Why can you not just talk to somebody? It doesn't make sense.
I'll just jump in with my perspective in particular on COVID. COVID is the single large public health crisis that we have faced in over 100 years. We're currently, every single day since November 4th, we've had over 100,000 new cases in the United States and over 1,000 people die. COVID is able to thrive in an environment of misinformation. And whether that's digital or cable news or a particular person's Facebook page or group, Facebook needs to recognize that it has responsibility to protect public health, and that its platform is creating the conditions for this virus to thrive. And as we are looking towards bringing on a new administration here in the United States that's committed to a coordinated, data-driven national response, what we need to get on the other side of this pandemic, I think it's imperative that Facebook and its executives raise their hand to work side by side to be partners in implementing that plan. And that's going to mean making some really tough choices of potentially shutting down some pages, shutting down some individuals to ensure that public health misinformation is not all across the platform.
Thank you to everyone. I'll just jump in as the campaigner. We've thought a lot about what solutions can be, and I have 5 that I'd like to suggest now. One is that we need Facebook to transparently detox its algorithm. We need it to investigate and appropriately downgrade or take down top groups and pages that are repeatedly sharing misinformation, and to reduce the virality of these serial misinformers. We need Facebook to monitor private groups and event pages, as Eric has said. Correct the record, meaning, as Joyce pointed out, issuing retroactive corrections and correcting all misinformation posted or shared that's been verified by independent fact checkers. We need truth. Fourth, to consider applying friction to the entire platform to slow virality, given the way that they've been unable to track and downgrade misinformation in a systematic way. And finally, to hire content moderators and to empower the content moderators they do have to be able to act and to understand the local context and the context of the various kinds of misinformation that are going viral on the platform. So those are just some very concrete things that we've been thinking about that Facebook can do today, if it so chose. Okay, let's turn to our next question. This from Whitney at Gizmodo. Whitney, could you please, there you are.
Hi, this is a question more for Avaz generally, but as we know, many conspiracy and extremist groups are moving to Parler and other platforms at the moment. I was just wondering how Avaz and others are planning for a more extreme version of Facebook where, misinformation and fear is allowed to run rampant as the primary form of content. And there's no even kind of like talking out of both sides of their mouth, sort of promises that they'll do better. Like Parler doesn't intend to do better at all. So I was just wondering what we see happening in the next couple of years and what we can do about that.
I will just chime in to say we are aware of the migration that's happening from Facebook to these even less moderated other platforms, and we have started to look into it. So watch the space, and we should be able to report more in due course. Eric, I don't know if Muslim Advocates also has been looking at these smaller platforms.
Yeah, we are too. I think, it's still in early days dealing with this, with this evolution of hate online. But I do think that giant companies like Apple and Google bear a lot of responsibility and should be concerned about what they are allowing by, hosting Parler on the App Store and things like that. So we're looking into things like that. But also, just because these groups are moving to Facebook or moving off Facebook doesn't mean that the problem is going away on these traditional larger networks. Facebook has such a large footprint around the world. Like we were talking about in Myanmar, Facebook is basically the internet. So, just because some hate groups are finding other avenues doesn't mean that Facebook and other platforms are getting less toxic.
And again, I think this speaks just finally to the need to have people who are really well-versed in countering violent extremism be part of these efforts to moderate on whichever platforms these groups are appearing on. Okay, so I think that's it for questions. I'm just gonna allow for 1 second in case anybody has a final question. No? Okay, so to wrap up, here in the US, we're living through a democratic emergency, as I said earlier, that is being facilitated by Facebook. And the cost, as you've heard today, to real human lives is tremendous. Their stories are stories of deep grief, but sometimes we need grief to crack our hearts open. These women today, and up until now, have been constantly engaging in a radical act of truth-telling, which is essential for us to confront the systemic harm that has been created by a private company like Facebook. And so my question to Facebook, I'll leave it with this, is, are you listening to these voices, Facebook? What will you do to protect all of us from further harm? And in closing, I want to thank all of our speakers for sharing, and particularly to the survivors who've demonstrated bravery, leadership, and continued resilience in coming forward with your stories, particularly as you continue to battle and confront the grief and the loss that you've experienced in your own lives. And thank you to all the journalists and to the viewers for tuning in, and to the Real Facebook Oversight Board for hosting us. Thank you and have a good day further.